RevOpsAF, the only podcast for people who are RevOpsAF and want to learn all about things that are RevOps AF.
Our goal is to give the revenue operations community, that includes marketing, sales, and CS, for any of you not paying attention, the skills needed to accelerate their careers.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of RevOpsAF, the podcast. I am your co-host, Matthew Baum, CEO and founder of RevOps Co-op, a global community of 16,000 plus revenue operators from all over the globe. And on the RevOpsAF podcast, we talk to people who are RevOpsAF about things that are RevOpsAF. And today I am sitting down with Robert Dyer, who is the VP of Revenue Strategy over at Suplari. And we're going to be talking about rebuilding or maybe building your tech stack from the ground up in the era of AI and today's technology environment. And Robert has a unique perspective here because he was part of Suplari when they were originally acquired by Microsoft. They then spent a couple of years within Microsoft and then were actually spun out to be an independent company again. So he's been through this journey of getting acquired and now spun out. And so he has a very unique perspective on essentially now building the tech stack at the same company two different times and in very different environments. So, Robert, I'm excited to talk to you about that today, my friend. But why don't you first add me to that personal and professional introduction that I just mentioned?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, excited to be here, Matt, and thanks for having me on the podcast. I think you did a good job describing where I'm at and what I've been doing the last few years. I do always like to call out for folks who I'm meeting for the first time or asking, how did you get into RevOps, as kind of falling backwards into it. I was originally in sales as an IC, and then I took over a sales team as their manager for the first time and started to recognize a lot of the processes that I wasn't super happy with as a salesperson. I now had the opportunity to influence them, but it required getting my hands dirty and digging in and asking the question, just because we've always done it this way, is this really the best way to do it? And that was my introduction into RevOps. Excited to be here.
No, that's great. And so let's talk first a little bit about your first rodeo, which was 2020 to 2023. You were the director of sales and business development there. Tell us a little bit about what things looked like on the tech stack side for Suplari before we even dive into that. Tell us a little bit about Suplari, the revenue model, the business model, so folks can understand how the business was running and how the tech stack was set up to support that.
Yeah, great question. Suplari, the business model, enterprise SaaS platform for procurement and finance professionals. So we serve that top of the mid market and the whole enterprise range from 1 billion to 30 billion plus in revenue. It's heavily services focused solution and deployed a lot of unique technologies. And certainly as time has gone on, we've evolved. As far as the business setup, we were set up with an SDR team and an AE team. We had a marketing team who was working on performance marketing, demand generation. So there was the way we would approach an opportunity was a mixture of cold outbound, which wasn't super successful when I first showed up at Suplari. And then there was a mixture of demo inbound, which had more traction. And then there were some untapped areas. We had quite the built up marketing list as I was coming into the business, but not a lot of activity or conversion coming out of that. It was your traditional SDR to AE handoff. One of the things I was brought in to address was the breakdown between the SDR team qualifying a lead and the AE team, then what happens with the lead and why weren't we getting attribution from this outbound team in our closed deals.
Yeah. You mean marketing and sales were not aligned or disagreeing? Who would have ever thought? So very helpful to kind of set the stage. So in a, kind of SaaS environment like that, where you've got inbound, outbound SDRs, account executives, talk a little bit about the technology stack you were on. This is pre-acquisition. So we're talking about 2020 to 2023. What were the main kind of tools, systems that you were using, and how did you kind of think about that from an operations standpoint, supporting your stakeholders and the way you were going to market, selling, retaining customers?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually had a few different tech stacks happening. Our marketing team was somewhat siloed on Marketo, and then we had some other supporting technologies there. Our sales team was split down the middle. We had AEs working out of Salesforce, and we had SDRs working out of Outreach. Then from a lead enrichment or prospecting perspective, obviously Sales Navigator was part of the tech stack, but when I came in, we were using data from DiscoverOrg. So there had been, at one point we made an investment in a large amount of data. It's kind of the legacy way of getting B2B data before 2020, where you would buy a list from a DiscoverOrg, right? We had some challenges for sure. One of the challenges I noticed right away was the teams were kind of in siloed systems, and we didn't have great data sync. Anybody who's run Outreach and Salesforce together knows this. Outreach likes to open the entire Salesforce record and push all of its data all at once. If you have any validation errors on the Salesforce side, then the Salesforce record doesn't commit. Now, you've basically got two wolves that went off into the woods a million years ago, and now you've got, one of them's a Labrador and the other one's a Doberman. So that's our lead data or prospect data looked like. We also had no sync of opportunity from Salesforce back to Outreach. A lot of pain points there, which were outside of process and team and how we were approaching qualification, identifying an ICP, qualifying them and converting them and handing them off. Before we could even get to that, we'd have fixed a lot of those data intricacies. It's not the fault of either platform. It's just that the way they were integrated originally did not account for the way that both platforms work. So we ended up with a jumble of wires.
Yeah. I like the Labrador and Doberman analogy. I've never heard that one before, but makes a whole lot of sense. You have the same starting point, but certainly they look different by the time they come back around.
Yeah. They don't get along.
Yeah, exactly. So it sounds like typical setup, right? You're running your outbound, your inbound, your marketing team had their marketing automation platform, their map. Your sales team had the CRM and Salesforce. You had an outreach platform, a sales engagement platform in Outreach. You were obviously successful. You were acquired by Microsoft. Part of the integration into Microsoft was getting rid of all of that technology and becoming embedded into the Microsoft org. But then interesting enough, then you were kind of spun out and now you're this standalone company again. So maybe talk us through the journey of getting acquired and then kind of spun out of Microsoft. And then we can get into how you're approaching this whole tech stack now that you've got this clean slate or new starting point. Tell us what it was like to get acquired, go through the technology implementation there, and then get spun back out. I can imagine that was not an everyday occurrence when those things happen within a couple of year period of time.
Yeah, not an everyday occurrence. Come from a family of folks who have worked in and around Microsoft, come from a Microsoft town. So I always told myself I like the smaller, scrappier startup life. So I never planned to go to Microsoft. When we were acquired by Microsoft, the goal was exactly what you just said. Like, hey, let's port our processes over and let's enable the Microsoft team to sell Suplari. That took a little longer than anticipated, not on our side in terms of porting our processes over, but in terms of, hey, we need to take this, very, very nuanced and sophisticated technology, now rebuild it in a new environment, right? So that took some time. In the meantime, there was a lot of technology management that needed to happen. One of the things Microsoft is very good about is they don't dictate, hey, you must use our software. Instead, they encourage you to use it where you're going to get the best results and support using competitive software where it makes sense. So, first up was identifying, well, what could we replace, without creating any issues, and what were the gains of those replacements? A lot of it was negotiating vendor contracts now that we were up under Microsoft, which was actually kind of nice because it gives you a lot more buying power and leverage in the negotiation than before. So it was a very interesting transition for the team. We started working with Microsoft sellers a lot more closely. And so we had to rethink the process of how we approached an engagement. We had to think the process of how we evaluated an engagement and, of course, how we quantified that in our database so we could track it to fruition.
So you work on integrating to Microsoft. Microsoft makes the business decision that Suplari would be best best served or be able to best serve the market as a independent or standalone company. So I know that and before that happened, you ended up leaving Microsoft, joined another, and then you were
That's
brought
right.
back to Suplari once they were spun out. Talk a little bit about the journey during the spin out. And when you were first brought in to rebuild all this stuff, did you have any sort of starting point? Was there a tech stack currently in place? Were you starting from scratch? And what was your starting point? And then from there, we can talk about how you approach things.
Yeah, I'll hit the journey really high and then we'll get into the question you just asked. I think that's probably the meatier questions. I was recruited by a company in a similar field to come in and build out their account management function. A completely different lens on the traditional roles I've held and where I've worked. The neat thing about it is all the same principles apply to the account management function that apply to the RevOps function. With RevOps, ideally, the account management function flows into the processes and the strategies and the technologies that you're deploying. When you're managing the account management stack, it does make it a journey of how to get buy-in. Like, hey, this team actually needs access to these tools, these resources, so we can be more successful. And now you're working across marketing and sales to ensure that you have access to these resources, but also that you're influencing the journey. We implemented a new customer success platform while I was at that organization. How are we going to ensure that this is informing our core technology stack, which was Salesforce? How are we going to ensure that we have our processes, our handoffs, and our transitions between the two platforms? So it's a similar story to the SDR and the account executive. When you have a CSM and an account manager, there's this very similar handoff and ensure the data is flowing both ways. So anyhow, to skip forward to what it was like coming back to Suplari, in a lot of ways, we had some structure, retained our customer base through the transition. But from a technology standpoint, when I came back, we were doing everything in Google Docs. We were very much an early stage, scrappy startup, literally everything. We were recording customer calls in Docs. We had our worksheets of what to act on next sitting in Sheets, and you get the idea.
Oh, man, it's elevated right now thinking about trying to manage this.
That dashboard was a Google Sheet with 40 tabs and inconsistent formatting. We were capturing key stakeholders and operational stakeholders for our customers. Sometimes we had a first name, sometimes we had a first and last name. Occasionally we had an email. So it was really the Wild West, and it warmed my heart because I feel like that's the most environment to come into. Right away, the first thing I said is, okay, let's deploy a customer relationship management platform. I mean, the CRM feels like the wrong term now. I feel like we should evolve it, and it should really be revenue data management or revenue whatever. But let's deploy that first and foremost. And I did something that to this day, I still am happy with the decision, but I also still sometimes wonder late at night, what was I thinking? We ended up selecting HubSpot as our CRM rather than working with Salesforce, which is what I've spent my career working with. That is not because Salesforce isn't a great platform. I actually think with the number of integrations they have and the flexibility you have in Salesforce, it's still an incredibly powerful platform. It was because I wasn't going to have a lot of resources and a lot of time. And I think HubSpot is uniquely set up for the solo operational setup. There's practically nothing that a person can't do in HubSpot on their own with a little bit of time and elbow grease. So we deployed HubSpot. And what I did that was different from previously, and this is where having a little more strategic oversight in my role helped, was I also brought the customer success team into the same platform. My goal was that all elements, all touch points of our customer's journey would be captured and enabled through HubSpot. From marketing, we use the marketing solution with HubSpot, all the way to, okay, now we're engaging these leads, we're converting these leads, we're closing them. Now we're implementing them and servicing them over the lifetime. That's all captured in HubSpot. And that's given us a lot of visibility. And it's, I think, solved a lot of the previous headaches we used to have from having the customer journey captured in a separate area. Building an agile tech stack means being agile. We've plugged and played some different tools along the way. The tech stack we settle on is HubSpot at the core. We have a couple of enrichment tools, Apollo.io, Clay, you may have heard of that one. Matt, I'm not sure. And then, still working with, from a sales perspective, LinkedIn Sales Navigator. And then from an outbound perspective, used a couple of different tools instantly right now for our true cold outbound efforts. We have other, technologies we've played with. I used to have a lot of success with a tool called Phantom Buster. I think they're still great. I made the move to Clay because everything's kind of built in and it's just so much. Right? That can be my motto. Make it powerful, but make it easier, right? That's kind of my goal right now is if I'm not going to have a lot of resources, I have to do it myself. I want it to be powerful, but I want it to be easy to set up and easy to maintain.
Yeah. So a couple of things there I think are interesting. In today's environment, I've been seeing this across a lot more companies as well, especially new companies getting started, which is a very strong desire to stay as lean as possible, grow as fast as possible. Previously, a lot of startups were always all about like, we'll go out, we'll raise some money, we'll hire a bunch of people, right? That's how we're going to get to X milestone. But now, actually, a lot of people and a lot of founders are like, I want to get to $30 million of ARR with 5 people. And I think that sort of mentality is also trickling down to teams at these companies, right? Where it's like, I want to invest in technology to help me stay small, lean, scrappy. And you mentioned that was one of the big reasons for the CRM switch, where you previously had all this Salesforce experience. It's a super powerful platform, but everyone's is truly unique and different. And you need implementation resources, you need development resources to maintain what you have there. And HubSpot is very, very different, right? You get all of these capabilities across all of these different hubs or teams, right? From marketing to sales to CS. It allows you to stay within one platform. So the consolidation makes your life as an operator and as a revenue team a lot easier. You're able to operate a lot more efficiently and effectively. Now, there are plenty of drawbacks to that approach as well. It's all about trade-offs and nothing's going to be perfect, but the world that we're operating in today, staying lean, staying scrappy, doing as much as you can with as little as you have is really powerful. The other example that you brought up is very different, right? You said pre-Microsoft acquisition back in 2021, you would go out and contract with a data provider directly, right? And it was expensive. So typically you only did one. I don't know if I've ever met anyone who's actually ever been super happy and satisfied with any data provider they've ever contracted with. It's always like, oh yeah, it's easy to get started, but it's always like, oh, phone numbers in Europe are bad, or fill in the blank, right? There's always so that was the world before, right? Where you had to go out, and if you had more budget, then maybe you could contract with more than one provider, but it was expensive, not only in dollars to get the data, but also in terms of your time as an operator to integrate and deploy all that stuff within your stack. Now, you mentioned Clay, right? With a tool like Clay, like you have access to 20 different data providers through one platform. I was in there the other day with all of the company records that we have in our HubSpot instance. And within 5 minutes, I had hooked up a new integration that enriched 8,500 company records, NAICS industry, employee band range, revenue range, technology stack, right? And it went through, like, I can set up data waterfalls. Okay, I'd start with this data provider, then move on to this data provider. I could go down the list, and that's all available off the shelf. It took me a couple of minutes to get a table set up to do. So compare that now to, again, what the world looked like maybe just 3 years ago, where you had to contract with just one data provider. It was super hard to typically deploy or implement. It's typically really expensive. Like that stuff is all now completely changed.
A completely different world. I agree. I think back to the dark arts of trying to build your own automations that water flow into a spreadsheet so you can then integrate them into Salesforce, because obviously you're not integrating the 10 to 12 different data sources. And now you can, when a lead inbounds, you can enrich the data through a waterfall or whatever approach you want to use and have it scored instantly. It's fascinating how far we've come. I will also say we leverage AI, where my philosophy for leveraging AI is very similar to the philosophy we deploy at Suplari, which is there's a tool for every job, and you wouldn't go out and start hoeing your garden with a steamroller, right? That wouldn't be the right approach. That's been fascinating for me as well, how quickly, how instantly we can perform research on our accounts as they come in to see how well they align with our ideal customer profile, how quickly we can do research on our personas, on our prospects as they come in, so that we can gain that fundamental understanding of, hey, is this somebody that is likely to have the sort of problems that we solve? And that's really the philosophy of how I built our enrichment, is not to replace the human, but to augment the human. So, now when a lead inbounds, we have information on them that goes above and beyond what we would just collect in a form. We're not going to ask them 15 questions in the form, but now we have this summary that can help us to personalize and really help us to make sure that our outreach is relevant and that we're prepared. And I think that's it shows a lot of respect for the prospect and their time. And it also shows respect for the internal user of the tool to not replace their effort, but again, to simplify it, to take the administrative, piece out of it and allow them to do what they do best, which is interpret the information and build a perspective.
Yeah, it's about reallocating the effort elsewhere. And I think, that's been one of the other things I've been thinking a lot about, especially as it relates to AI and revenue operations or just revenue generation. If you think about where it's really powerful and why, it's because of the productivity piece that you just mentioned. Let's take the form fill example. We all know as users, if you, uh, so we all know as humans, right? If we're going through an onboarding process, the more screens that we insert in that process, the more drop off we will see, because it's one more thing that someone has to do. So form is the same exact way. The more properties that you have on a form, the more drop off that you're
That's
going.
right.
So now you eliminate properties, you'll see less drop off. You'll drive more form fills. So that's starting point. Right? Like you said, now you're getting more volume coming in the door and you're automating maybe a lot of the lead scoring and the research part so that you're able to serve and surface the most relevant, the most important leads for your sales team so that they can do what they do, human conversations with people, interpret the data and have those human conversations, call them, send them an email, right? If we think about productivity, our sales team, we're taking a lot of this noise away. If you're faced with that exact scenario, are you going to say, oh, now that my sales team can be more efficient, I'm actually going to fire the good sales reps I have because I'm fine just producing the same amount of revenue with fewer people? Is anybody going to say that? Like, no,
Some might.
yeah. I mean, some might, I guess, depends on where you're at. But what you're going to do is you're going to be like, no, now you can go out and you can sell more, right? So you can grow more. And I think that's where the opportunity is, and especially the big impact where RevOps can have. And so you mentioned the lead scoring and the account research thing. Do you have any specific examples on, as an operator, how you're applying AI at Suplari today? Specifically, let's say there's folks out there who are like, I haven't really gotten started yet, or maybe I'm not sure where to start. Where would you tell them to start? What advice would you give them on how they can begin to use and deploy AI to be a more effective, more efficient revenue operator and drive value for their business?
I think it's a great question, Matt. It's important to think of how AI fits your strategy and how it can help you augment your team rather than, hey, how do we, AI is the strategy and, how do we just plug it in everywhere to create more efficiencies? Anecdotally, I've heard of a lot of SDR teams being shrunk or laid off entirely to be replaced by fully automated SDRs. While that may work in a very short period of time, what we've seen is drop-offs in successful send rates and open rates and click-through and reply, precipitous drop-offs. And these are being driven by shops that are, frankly, replacing humans with the machine and telling the machine, well, you don't need to be good. You just need to be able to send 500,000 emails. That's what I mean when I say it can't be the strategy. It needs to be, how do I augment my strategy? For us here at Suplari, our strategy is to protect our brand first and foremost, to never be that business that's out there pushing itself on prospects who may not have the problems we solve or who just may not be ready to solve them, right? And so I think of it as, first of all, how do we identify intent in our prospects? So there are intent signal companies out there. We can get into a whole philosophical debate about how effective that is. but you can measure other elements that will help you understand whether or not your prospect is likely to have the intent or have the problem that you solve. And so we can use AI in certain ways to fill in some gaps, right? We can also use it to speed up speed to decision or the speed to insight for our sellers. And when I say this, what I mean is, okay, I've got a bunch of information that I could push into fields in HubSpot, but then it's the same as if I had a research assistant pushing this information into HubSpot. Now as an SDR or as an AE, I still have to go out and pull this information together and make something meaningful of it. So we can deploy an LLM GPT style AI to pull together these different threads of information that maybe we've gotten through LinkedIn or the company website or whatever source we've been able to pull some relevant information from, and we can create a story. I like to think of it as it would take the team a lot longer to create that story for themselves. Why don't we have the AI do the research, create the story, we train it on what we're looking for, what's important to us, and the tone. When I look at a lead, I've got a quick summary that tells me whether or not this lead is likely to be an ICP for me. I also have traditional AI telling me whether they meet our other requirements like demographics. That's where I would recommend people start. Let's not try to replace the whole tech stack with all-in-one AI solution. Let's look at those gaps in our efficiency, those gaps in our process, and understand, okay, where can thoughtfully applying AI help us become more efficient, make better use of our time, and focus on more strategic activities. And that's the dividing line for me. If it's an administrative task and you can get AI to do it, there's really no reason not to. If it's a task that takes to empathy and human intuition, you probably shouldn't be tasking AI with it. In my opinion, you should be trusting your salespeople to do that. And I think the tolerance level, Matt, like where do I kind of draw the line between the human and the machine? It has a lot to do with the market you're in and how transactional or high velocity your sales cycle is versus an enterprise strategic sales cycle. So for us, we lean way more towards human in the loop and human driving the process. Whereas if you're dealing with thousands of inbound leads a day, you can very quickly simplify some inbound outreach that you automate, that's personalized, that surfaces the most relevant information for the prospect before they ever talk to a salesperson. I think you should do that if that's the problem that you're trying to solve. So I do think that context is super important.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And it's easy, especially, you look at all the noise out there on LinkedIn and elsewhere about feeling like you're missing out if you're not somehow leveraging AI to literally do everything for you during the day, like personal or professional, right? It's like, oh my God, you cooked yourself dinner. Like, why didn't you use AI to do that? It's like, hey, come on now. So it's easy to feel like you're missing out. But to your point, if you're just going around and looking at AI as a hammer, then everything is going to look like a nail. What you need to do, instead of starting with the solution and saying, oh my God, I've got to start to use AI, what can I apply this to? Start with the problem. If you haven't started with AI yet, I'd say start with one problem and then go from there. For example, the first thing that I started using Clay for actually was I wanted to know the physical location of our community members so that I could invite them to local events. I wasn't able to get this data from built-in data enrichment we had at the time through HubSpot and all this other stuff. So I was like, okay, I'll use Clay to kind of do that. And then from there, I started to use it for all of these different things. I took our public site map from RevOps Co-op, put that through Chat GPT to pull out all of our prior content, for example, that we've created. Then I plugged that into a Clay table to put it all into a Google Doc. I put that back into Chat GPT to create me a style guide for each specific piece of content. Now, when we do podcasts, I have a 10-page style guide that's been created. I say, here's the transcript from my podcast episode with Robert, reference the style guide, create me a write-up. And it does it. Then I go and edit, add, and I tweak. Previously, that took hours and hours of time across like 3 or 4 contractors to do. But now it takes one person an hour to do all of that work. AI generated songs when we bring on a new sponsor for our conference, for example. I started with a very simple use case of data enrichment for our members wanted to solve one specific problem. And then from there, you just kind of start branching out. And so that's what I would encourage folks to do as well. Start with a problem, look at how you can solve that. AI is one option. You'll see really where all the power lies and all these other things that you can do with the technology. So with that, I do have one more question for you, Robert. It's not RevOps related, but I want to ask, every year we hold our RevOpsAF conference. This year we're doing it twice. We're doing our US event in New Orleans in May, and we're doing our EMEA event in Berlin, Germany in June. So for our New Orleans event, we're expecting 300 to 350 people there. I want you to imagine that you are the opening keynote speaker for RevOpsAF. Then there's 350 people in the crowd. We announce your name. Robert Dyer is going to come up on stage. Everyone stands up. They're all screaming, yelling, yeah, Robert. What would be your walk-up song that you would play as you came up on stage to deliver the opening keynote for RevOpsAF?
Wow. First of all, I just want to let anybody know that's listening, I was not prepared for this question.
That's right.
I have so many different songs that pop into my head. I'm not sure how many of them are appropriate.
They all are. I'll tell you some answers after you share yours.
Yeah, I like to think of myself as somebody who is strategic and data-driven. When it comes time to solve a problem, I dig in and I get at it until it's solved. So I'm going to go with Bring the Pain by Method Man as my walk song, because that would get everybody moving. It might serve as a nice juxtaposition to when I finally do walk up on stage and, I'm buttoned up.
I would not have pictured you a Method Man kind of guy. I figured you were going to go for like Metallica or AC/DC or like some sort of more like classic rock, hard rock.
But grew up on all of it. I love classic rock, so you're not too far off there. I'm a little more of an alternative guy. A lot of my listening influences growing up as a teenager in the 90s. Pearl Jam and Nirvana in there. Also a ton. Yeah, I grew up on Wu-Tang Clan. I still think Method Man and Redman are some of the more interesting lyricists out there. Love their stuff. And I'm trying to remember where I first saw Bring the Pain. I think it was an intro in a movie, like a boxing movie. And Method Man actually came out and introed the boxer. And that's about all I can tell you about the movie. I love the energy of it.
That's awesome. I support that. I mean, I've gotten answers from, I mentioned like Metallica, people have brought up. Actually, someone I did a podcast recently, someone referenced this Beethoven symphony. I was like, okay, first classical. Someone just brought up Sound of Music before. So it's been really all over the place. But you are actually the first
one to.
You're the first Method Man.
Okay,
first Method Man. So we have had like Eminem, All I Do Is Win, like some other songs, artists, right? Hip hop. But yeah, you're the first Method Man. Yeah.
Okay. Glad you had title.
Well, we've gone everywhere from building tech stack years ago to getting acquired to getting spun out to rebuilding a technology stack in the era of AI. And then we ended with Method Man. So I think we've hit everybody with enough in one episode, Robert. Thank you very much for joining and for dropping some knowledge on us, my friend. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been great, man. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode, everybody.
For more great content like this, join our community at RevOpsCoop.com and check out the links provided in the show notes.
Keep it RevOpsAF, y'all.